Forgive me. I also have to leave a quarter to 12. No, I can be a little late for that. I'm late for you. I can be a little late for that, but I have another share to give. But anyway, Shalom Aleichem. It's wonderful to have you. And it's a great thing. We're just coming off the mentor's mission. We go Mechayel El Chayel, Mylin B'Kaidesh. So, you're probably a more chashava thing than even the mentor's mission and the like. And we're very, very happy that you took off time from your schedules to come and be Isaac B'Torah for a few days. So I understand that you're learning two different sugyas. One is the Katan Shehizik thing, and then I think you'll have sugyas on Birkos Hananin, so you'll be learning two sugyas at the same time. So I'm here to talk a little bit about the Katan Shehizik. Of course, since you've already learned a lot of the Makairos, it takes away some of my introductory share, but I just want to summarize a few Nakudas. We start off with the Mishnah in Bavakama, famous Mishnah, that says that you don't want to encounter Isha, Evet, V'Katan. Pigyasan Ra. It's a bad luck to encounter them, because if you hurt them, you're chayav to pay for damages. But if they hurt you, they're going to be punished. Now, the thing is that the Mishnah seems to draw a distinction between the case of Isha v. Evet versus the case of Cheresh v. Katan. Because in Isha v. Evet, they're Gedolim, and they're chayav for their damages. They are chayav. The only thing is, there's a technical problem that they don't own property to be able to pay. So you're not going to be able to collect from them, but Einachinami, the Mishnah says, if the Evet becomes Meshuchrer, or the woman becomes Niskarsha, in such a situation, they owe you the money. They just can't pay.
Why does the Mishnah use the Lashon B'Turah?
I didn't hear you.
Why does the Mishnah use the Lashon B'Turah?
Well, I mean, I don't know how otherwise you express.
Shalman, Achesh.
Well, okay. I mean, the Mishnah says B'Turah, and then it says Mishalman. So in a sense, if you read it, no, I hear what you're saying, but we don't really have a lot. I hear, but we don't really have a lashon that says you owe the money, but we can't collect it from you.
We don't say money is potter. Same thing.
Okay, I hear. In other words, if it's only that's a good horror. Meaning, if you're using the term pigyasan ra only because they don't have property, then you might as well say bumping into an ani is pigyasan ra because he doesn't have property. I hear. I guess the difference might be that an ani any moment has the koach right now to go out and earn money. Mashenkin, the Isha and the Evet, they are right now in a state of disability, meaning Masha Kana Isha Kana Baila, Masha Kana Evet Kana Rabo, Masha Ngain the Ani, who knows? The Ani can win the lottery. If the woman wins the lottery, it goes to her husband, right? So you got a problem. But it is a horror. I'll think about it a little bit.
Ani could be sold as an Evet also, no?
Well, he could sell himself as an Evet. In other words, remember that the only time based in would sell somebody as an Evet Ivri is only if he was a ganef and he didn't pay. Meaning you don't get sold as an Evet Ivri because you didn't pay a debt that you owed. Even Chabala, even if you damage somebody, that's if it's not Geneva, you wouldn't be sold. But Evet Ivri too, has limitations. Evet Ivri is only noheg when there's Yovel. When there's no Yovel, there was no din of Evet Ivri. But the Mishnah that is mashma that in the case of a Katan is, and a Shaita and a Cheresh, even if they get better, the Katan becomes a Gadol, they're Patur Lagamri, simply because at the time of the Maisa Chavala, they were not B'nai Das, they're not responsible. So you don't morph into a Bar Chiyuva later. So the Pigyasan Rav, a Katan, is even worse than the Pigyasan Rav in Isha or in Evet. So the Shulchan Aruch paskins in two different places, both in Hilchos Geneva and in Hilchos Chayvel, that taka, the straightforward ruling of the Gemara, that the Katan that's mazik is pater afilu kishehigdil, and the Katan that is gainef. So by gainef we have a little bit of a subtlety. If a kid stole, so the pshat is like this: if the Geneva is still bien, right? He stole my computer, but he has my computer. My computer's there. So b'chiyai gavna, that's not a chi of mammon. That's simply giving back property. So certainly, if the Geneva is bien, we take it back from a 2-year-old. But if the Geneva got destroyed and you're dealing with chiyuvim, einochinami, the Shulchan Aruch paskins both by chovel he hurt me, and by ganav, a katan is pater. And there's no mention. It's important to note that both in the Rambam and in the Shulchan Aruch, there is no mention of a chiyuv bidei shamayim or lifnim mishura sadin. That comes up later. It seems to be legamri a patur. So the emes is this. The emes is that the idea that there's maybe a chiyuv kishiyagdil. Now again, this could be mugdar in two different ways. Some will interpret it as a chiyuv lotzei shidei shamayim. Now remember, a chiyuv lotzei shidei shamayim is a pretty powerful thing. It is actually an obligation, albeit not enforceable in Beis Din. It is such a significant level of obligation that Rashi learns in many places in Shas that tefisa helps, meaning if you owe me money because it's ba lotzei shidei shamayim, even though Beis Din is not going to make you pay, if I were to grab it, I would actually keep it, because that's a chiyuv lotzei shidei shamayim. So there are going to be two terms here. Don't confuse them. That later poskim use. One is the katan kishehigdil chayav lotzei shidei shamayim, or there's a lesser idea that he should give something back, something, all, or well, they'll see that lifnim mishura sadin, or midas chasidus. So it seems that lifnim mishura sadin and midas chasidus seem to be roughly synonymous. The Achronim do not make a distinction there. So again, Rambam and Shulchan Aruch seem to indicate there's no level of obligation on the part of the katan. I'll discuss later what about the father. Is the father obligated? Under secular law, by and large, parents might be obligated. In fact, I think they say b'shem the Chafetz Chaim. There's a famous statement of the Sema, the Sefer, the Be'er Sinai, the Peres Nechesh and Mishpat, that das balabatim, no insult intended here, das balabatim is hepech das Torah. Whatever a balabas thinks is the opposite of the halachas. So the Chafetz Chaim actually gave a mashal. The Welt thinks, if my kid breaks a window, I got to pay. If my cat created an accident, I don't have to pay. In halacha, it's the opposite. I'm mechuyev for the nezek my animal causes. I'm not necessarily mechuyev for the nezek that my child causes. So that's, as Chafetz Chaim said, this is an interesting example that the balabas's das is fakir. They tell an interesting ma'aseh, reminds me of a funny story. The Meshech Chachma of Meir Simcha, the Ohr Somayach, and the Rogatchover were the two Rabbanim of Dvinsk. The Rogatchover was the Hasidic Rav. The Rogatchover was actually Chabad. In fact, Chabad has a Messiah. I'm not sure if it's been verified that the last Rebbe actually got smicha from the Rogatchover. Or Meir Simcha was the non-Hasidic Rebbe. So they once had a big machlokes in how to learn. So the Rogatchover said, listen, we have a machlokes. Let's ask the man on the street how he understood Pshat. And whatever the man on the street says, we'll know the opposite is emes, because hepech das balabas bas Torah. So they asked the balabas in the street, and the balabas said, just like the Rogatchover. So that's a raya. The Rogatchover is wrong. So the Rogatchover said, listen, even balabatim have a bad day sometimes, meaning they'll sometimes get it right. Okay, but be it as it may, the big kasha that is asked on this idea of katan shehizik patra legamri is from a Gemara in Bavakama, which discusses the very interesting issue. It's very interesting even apart from katan, of sreifas shtar. Let's say you have a promissory note, you have an IOU, you have a shtar chayv that somebody owes you money, and someone goes out and burns the shtar. So he was mazik my property. How much does he have to pay? Does he only pay the value of the paper, or the value of the collectible, the value of the receivable that could be collected with the paper? So this is totally on a huge sugya, which is not our sugya, but it's a huge sugya called Dina de Garmi. Right, the Ramban wrote a whole kuntris, but we have Grama is Benizakin is Pater, Garmi is a Machlokes, are you chayav? And Grama is indirect causation of damage, Garmi is when I did a Maisa Hamazik, but the loss is an indirect loss. So the Gemara says, if you hold Dina de Garmi is Chayav, the burner of the star would have to pay the value of the receivable, because by destroying your paper, I prevented you from collecting that amount of money, or you could have sold it even. It's also an asset you can sell. Masha'en Kain, if you hold, you don't, that Dina de Garmi is only a type of grama, you only pay the value of the paper. Okay, that's a machlokas.
Is the likelihood of the collectability on the debt a factor?
Well, yes, well.
It's a lot of dead paper I have in my office.
That's correct. But that would go to the value of the receivable, meaning a receivable is not necessarily valued. Meaning it's kind of a market situation. I mean, what could you sell it for? Now, there are companies, as you know, that buy bad debt, right? So there actually is a market, even in bad debt. Of course, it's heavily discounted. So somebody might buy $1 million note, for whatever it is, 30% or 25%. So certainly it would go into the value. But the only thing is, this is only true if you hold done in Dina de Garmi. If you hold not, you only pay the value of the paper. Right, so the Gemara says the following: Rafram forced Ravashi to pay full value.
Who was Rafram? What authority did he have?
Rafram. Well, we'll discuss this. So the question is, what's going on? What did he force Ravashi? Ravashi burnt a star. Ravashi burnt somebody's star. Why would Ravashi burn somebody's star? So Rashi tries to answer what's going on, and Rashi says, "Biyaldusai." So if your kids are wild, don't be miyayish. Apparently, Ravashi may have been a shtickle wild. He burnt somebody's star, although we'll talk about that. In other words, Rashi's trying to tell us, well, for Shteitzach, Ravashi didn't burn somebody's star when he was a gadol, but he burned when he was a katan. So what does it say? Rafram, who was a dayan, made Ravashi pay the full value. So the kasha is, how do you understand that? If I learn like Rashi, that Ravashi was Sayrif the Shtar Bialdusai, and Rafram is making him pay, Katan Shehizik is pater. So the Hagai Sashri, not the Rush, the Hagai Sashri, is somebody else, actually says, from Rashi, we are Mochiach, which is not brought down in the Rambam or the Shulchan Aruch, that a Katan that is Mazik is Mechuyav al Pidin l'chayra, not even b'dei Shamayim, is Mechuyav al Pidin to make restitution when he becomes a Gadol, and that's the meaning of Rafram forced Ravashi.
What do you do how do they learn the Mishnah?
So how do they learn the Mishnah? So they learn the Mishnah. If you read the Mishnah, you can fetch it in, that the statement, im niskarsha ha'isha, im nishtachar ha'eved, is only picking up some of the examples, but it's going on everything, meaning you would also extend it. It's like put a v'chulu after that. And the Hagai Sashri learns that it even goes on Katan Shehigdel. Now, it's interesting, it's not clear if it would apply to a shaita. It's interesting, meaning, is there a chiluk between Katan and shaita? What about the shaita gets better? Okay, that's not clear. Now, Rabbi Kiveger writes in a tshuva that the das of the Hagais Ashri is a deya yichidoihi. It's a das yochid, and so we don't paskin like that at all, and that's why the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch don't paskin that way. The only question is, well, if it's Rashi's shita, that's pretty strong, right? So how do you understand Rashi here? Because Rashi seems to be saying exactly that. So the emes is, there are a few terutzim for Rashi in which Rashi would not contradict the Mishnah. Erstens, which is a little bit of a daichek, that the word Yaldusai does not mean Bekatnusai. Yaldusai means 15-year-old, little bit of a vel, which actually gives you even more hope if your kids are wild. That Ravashi was Vaday Agadol, Elamai, but he was a young kid. Of course, that is very shver. First of all, it's shver, why Ravashi? And second of all, if he did it as a gadol, why wouldn't he pay on his own? In other words, what does he need Rafram to be kaifa? Let's assume Ravashi was a little wild and he burnt a star. But if he did it as a gadol, he would certainly pay now.
Well, he doesn't hold the Garmi.
Oh, okay, so that could be, that's actually shaykh. That's actually shaykh to say that the issue was Dina de Garmi or Niyar Ma'alya, meaning Avada, he would have paid Niyar Ma'alya. So that's one teretz. Another teretz that the Taz gives, is that Achva, Kafiyah, is Lifnim Mishura Sadin. Meaning it does not mean Rafram forced him, it does not mean a based in Paskins, but it's an union of Lifnim Mishura Sadin, and Kafiyah does not mean any type of judicial punishment, but Kafiyah B'dvorim, he gave him a Musar Shmuz. And the Taz shtel su, a Maisa, in HaSeicheres HaPayala, at the end of HaSeicheres HaUmnin, in Bava Mitzia, about Rabba Bar Bar Chana, in which you see a very similar idea. Rabba Bar Bar Chana hired workers to transport his wine, and the workers were poshim, and the barrels broke, and Rabba Bar Bar Chana lost the wine. He was teveya them in Beis Din for pshia, and the psak was, for you, you're not going to collect. Sorry, they don't have to pay you. So he said, Dina hachi, is that the din? They said, for you, that's the din. You got to go lifnim mishur. Now again, the Shizim Mekabetzis explains, Avada, this was not a regular Beis Din. For Pumpakert, it's an Isser Diaraisa for a Beis Din to favor a litigant Shalo Kedin out of Rachmanis. But rather, it was similar to Rafram. It was like a single Rav that was giving hadracha to a Talmud, and he said, you should not collect from them. They're poor. That was their only defense. We're poor and we need a parnasa. Now, they then turned around and said, after he was told he could not collect for his wine, they then turned around and said, hey, you owe us money for our services. So here, Rabbi Bar Bar Chana was a little nishtaimim. He says, I got to pay, it's enough that I can't collect from them? I got to pay them? He says, yeah, that's a good idea. Orchai Sadikim, Pasuk in Mishlei, Tishmor. Got to be a tzaddik, you got to be a mavater. Now that whole Maisa is Lifnim Mishura Sadin. So the Taz learns that's exactly the situation of Rafram Achva L'Ravashi, that it was Bekat Nusay, and Me'ikar Adin, there was no Chiyav at all, like the Mishnah says, but at least for Ravashi, an Adam Gadol, an Adam Chashuv, there's an Indian of Lifnim Mishura Sadin. So that's how the Taz, so the Taz shtel su, the Taz is Medame it, mamish to that Maisa, and Achve does not mean any type of physical enforcement. It means a Musar Shmuz. It means, hey, you ought to do this. You're an Adam Gadol. Now, there's a third explanation, which is a different Rashi. This Maisa is brought elsewhere in Shas, and it's fascinating that Rashi elsewhere in Kesuvos, I think it is, brings a whole different explanation. That when it says Rafram forced Ravashi, it doesn't mean Ravashi burnt a star. It simply means that Ravashi was a dayan. He was going to paskin that whoever was mazik the star only has to pay the value of the paper. And Rafram argued, you got to follow dayan dina de garmi and b'mechayev to make star ma'alya. So it's not that Ravashi did anything at all here. Rafram is simply telling Ravashi to follow the halacha of Dina de Garmi. Now, obviously, that's not how Rashi and Bavakama learns. Rashi and Bavakama learns Ravashi was the actual Soreif Hashtar, but there is another pshat in the Gemara. Now, the emes is, with all of this Maisa, the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch themselves do not bring any inyan of Lifnim Mishura Sadin. They do not bring any inyan of Chayav Latzei Shadei Shemayim. The Hagai Sashri, who creates a Chayav Bidei Adam Kishayagdel, is a Deya Yechidoi, as Rebbe Kiveger says. And yet, the first mention, the first mention is really the Ohr Zarua, Truma Sedeshin, but in terms of the Sifrei Halacha Psuka, it is mentioned in the Ramah. So I don't know how, let's see what you have here. If you look on page 10, so you see an interesting thing. Now again, the Shulchan Aruch per se does not mention any of this, but the Ramah mentions it, and it's fascinating. This is not in Choshen Mishpat. In fact, you could even argue that the Ramah is not talking about Geneva or Gezela. He's talking about Averas generally that a Katan commits. Treif, whatever it is, Chilul Shabbos. So the actual discussion here is a different discussion. That is, if a Katan is doing an Aveira. A Katan is doing an Aveira. I see someone's son doing an Aveira. Am I mechuyev to stop him? So the halacha is, as the Ramah brings, that the emesis, the chiyuv of chinuch is only on a parent. So a parent is mechuyev to stop his higiyah lechinuch from doing Aveiras. But in terms of somebody else, I technically don't have responsibility. This is the principle called Katan Eichel Neveles, Ein Beistin Mitzuvin Lahafrisha. Even a Beistin is not mechuyev to be mafrishim, because the chiyuv of chinuch is on the father. The only requirement I have, if I'm not a parent, is I can't give him the Aveira. I can't give him treif. But if he's eating treif on his own, I don't have to stop him. Okay. But, yeah.
Isn't there a difference to go to Beistin and a Katan, whether it's a Darasa or a Darabana?
It's even the Doraisa Mamish. Even the Doraisa Mamish, right? See, this is what he says. Right, see, look at the Ramah here. Let's read the Ramah's language. This is the Haggah. This is not the Shulchan Aruch. Yesh omrim dechozah katan lo hagiya lechinuch. Some say that the lack of an obligation for me to separate a kid who's doing an Aveira is only if he's below the age of understanding, whatever age that is, 5 or 6. Avali hagiya lechinuch tzurichim lahafrisha, and this is brought from a Taisves. However, yesh omrim Delo shayach chinuch lebeistin, and kal v'chomer to us, non-beistin, ela liav bilvad. Okay, av, whether av includes aim is another shayla. Okay, we're not going to get into that for now, but it only applies to a parent. He says av. But then he says, so now this is nogea to our sugya, katan shehika es aviv. This happens. All right, a katan, right? There's an issue of the araisa to be maka aviv. Sometimes a kid will punch his parent's arm. So a katan shehika es aviv, o avar shara veiros bekatnusai, afal pi she'eino tzarich tshuva k'sheyagdil. He's not mechuyev in tshuva because for a katan there's chinuch taka, but there was no aveira that the katan committed. But mikol makayim, this is yesh imrim. Tov lo sheyakabel al atzmo ezed davor litshuva. Again, it's kind of a funny language here. Right after saying eino tzarich shuva, it then says he should be makabel something, some kabbalah, some chumrah, some hanhaga tova, to kind of do tshuva and kapara for what he did. Afal pi sha'avar kaidem shenasa bar onshin. Even though he did the Aveira before he was Chayev and Einesh, nonetheless, it is good to be Makabel. Part of this idea is that Aveiros have 2 consequences. One consequence of Aveira is you're Chayev and Onesh. You committed a sin. The other is it's Metamtem. Now some say it's only for Kashrus, but others say all Aveiros spiritually damage the Neshama. And without Shuvah, you don't cleanse your neshama. The analogy would be poison, right? You drink poison, it makes no difference, intentional, unintentional, old, young. The Aveira itself is like a spiritual poison. You need some element of tshuva to get it out of your system. Now, here, the Ramah, now by the way, when it says Mari is the Trumas Hadeshin. So this is really from the Trumas Hadeshin, and again, in Yeshiva Shiurim, the Trumas Hadeshin is not quoted that much, but in Psak Halacha, the Trumas Hadeshin is extremely, extremely important. Very early Acharon, maybe almost late Rishon, and the Ksais writes about the Trumas Hadeshin that he is Gedolei Acharonim. He considers Trumas Hadeshin to be the greatest of the Acharonim, and the Trumas Hadeshin introduces the idea, although it's earlier in the Ohr Somayach, of some type of tshuva. But again, this is not talking about chovel or Geneva, although by extension you could apply it. But look in the Mishna Bura. The Mishna Bura comments on this Trumas Hadeshin. First of all, he says, Katan sheganav o shehizik. If a katan steals or is mazik, ra'oi lebeistin lahakaisei, So here, it's interesting. Although for Chilul Shabbos, the Beis Din is not mechayiv to be mafresh, but when it comes to antisocial behaviors, mazik, he burns houses down, whatever it is. Here, Beis Din has to be proactive, not to punish the kid, but just to teach him a lesson not to do this type of behavior. Shelo yargel bo, he shouldn't become a habit. V'chein chavala ubiyush, even things like humiliating people. V'chol devarim shebein adam lechaveirei. So this is interesting. Beis Din does have a enhanced role in bein adam lechaveirei. Mitzvah la'afrisha shlo yara takola al yadai. Avo ein tzarich l'shalem imein Geneva bien. Remember, as I said, if the Geneva is here, of course he has to give it back. V'chol zeh midina avo lifnim mishuras hadin. So it's not a chiyuv bidei adam, as the Hagai Sashri said, and it's not even a chiyuv bidei shamayim. It's only a lifnim mishuras hadin. So what does he say? Bein shechavalo begufay, whether the katan was chayvel, the body of a person, o shehizik lo b'mamono, or whether he damaged the property, tzarich l'shalem lay, and the first makor that he brings is from the Taz, and remember, this is how the Taz was miyashiv Rashi, right? How could Rafram be kaifeh Ravashi if Ravashi was sayrev b'katnusai? So the Taz shall sue the Maisa of Rabba Bar Chana, and Achve just means the Muslish Muzah Bidvarim. But you see from the Taz that you might have learned, even if you learned that way, you might have learned that maybe Lifnim Yeshivat only applies to Ravashi, Adam Gadol. You see that the Lifnim Yeshivat Sadin is extended to apply to everybody. In other words, the way the Mishna Bura brings it, the Taz is understood as not creating a special rule for great Talmidei Chachamim or Gedolei Hador, but a rule that applies to anybody, and that's Lifnim Yeshivat. Now the other thing is that the language is pay in full. Now it's interesting, if you look at various tshuvas that talk about the Lifnim Yeshivat Adin, they compare it to the language of the Ramah. What is it called? By other Aveiros, Yekabel al atzmai ezed davor. And Achreinim have applied that as well, that even Lifnim Yeshivat Adin, the kid does not have to make full compensation, but he should propose some type of settlement, and the other person should accept the settlement in order to enable the child to be masakin himself. The Lashon of the Mishna Bura is not mashma that way. The Lashon of the Mishna Bura is mashma that at least the Lifnim Yeshivat Adin would require full restitution, but it is l'chol hapachais a Lifnim Yeshivat Adin, and this is the aside of how the Taz learns Rafram Achvei Ravashi. Okay, now there's a lot more to talk about here, and well, yeah.
Sarek l'shalem now? Sounds like now.
No, lav dafka, because now he doesn't have property, but as soon as he's able to pay. Now the emes is, do you have Yabia Aimer here? Let me just see if there's a long tshuva, not a long tshuva, but a 2-page tshuva. Yeah, you don't have it. But anyway, Rav Avadia has a long tshuva in which his maskana is, even Lifnei Yeshivat Adin, there is no obligation. But nevertheless, because neither the Rambam nor the Shulchan Aruch mentions it, and even the Ramah mentions it as a Yesh Aimrim, but not in Chayshin Mishpat, meaning the Ramah is primarily talking about Bein Adam Lamakam in terms of Kashrus, Shabbos, and the like, not necessarily monetary obligations. But the thing that I do want to talk about, and again, I will squeeze it in somehow. I know I'm going to meet 2 more times with you, but I'll find ways to integrate whatever I didn't say now, is the very, very, very fascinating ha'ara. Well, two fascinating ha'aras. Some bring a chiddush like this. You know, there is a Chasam Sofer, a Tshuvas Chasam Sofer, that says, under Dinei B'nei Noach, the definition of Katan and Gadol is not based on years, because that's part of Shiurim, which are Halacha Moshe Misinai, only apply to Jews. But there is a rule that a Katan is not Chayav, but the definition of a Katan is a function of intelligence. And therefore, if you have like a very unperceptive 15-year-old, he might be patur as a Katan under B'nai Noach law, and a very intelligent 8-year-old might be Chayav Misa under Dinei B'nai Noach. Now, based on that yesod of the definition of godless and Katan, some Achrayim make the following point. Chazal say, Mi ika midi, there is no such thing that something is usher for a ben Noach and mutter for a Yisrael. If it's usher for a ben Noach, it must be usher for a Yisrael as well. So Memela, they want to say that we have to be machalek between a kid who was intelligent enough to understand what he was doing, let's say he's 10 years old, and versus a 6-month-old baby that moved around and broke a glass vase. He says, if it's a 10-year-old kid, as a ben Noach, he would be chayav, bidei adam. And because of mi ika midi, that would generate not just lifnim mishuras hadin, that would actually generate a chiyuv gomer bidei shamayim based on the principle of mi ika midi. So yesh aimrim, therefore. Now again, in the Shulchan Aruch and the Rambam, there's absolutely no remiss to this. So whatever you say is going keneged what the Shulchan and the Rambam says, but some want to say in Svara, a kid who understands what he's doing, al tzmi ika midi would not only be a lifnim mishuras hadin, it would be a chiyuv gomer lotzei sidei shemayim. So that's one very, very fascinating nekuda. Of course, people always ask that, this creates a real difficulty. Because, under the Dinei B'nei Noach, every violation of the Noahide law is a capital crime for a guy, not for a Jew. So, imagine if we conducted our society based on Noahide law. So you have an 8-year-old who steals an apple from a fruit stand. So, if he's a Noahide, the halacha would be that we would execute kids for stealing fruit and candy. Well, if that's the halakha, that's the halakha. We have to be makabel, but somehow it's hard to be makabel. So I just want to share with you, it's nothing to do with our sugya, that there is a ha'ara from the Chelkas Yayev. Chelkas Yayev was a Talmud of the Avnei Nezer, a very chashuv Talmud Chacham, who actually writes a big chiddush, and I wish the Rishonim would say it, because it's really a tremendous chiddush for an Acharon to say, that the rule that B'nai Noach are Chayav Misa is not a Chiyuv. It just means Hashem left the determination of punishments to the B'nai, unlike the Torah, where the Torah is Koveya punishments, for B'nai Noach, they can impose any punishment they want up to the death penalty, but there is no obligation to impose the death penalty, and indeed a civilized society normally would not. When the state of Illinois was considering whether to impose capital punishment, this is around 40 years ago, so Rav Aaron Soloveitchik testified as a legislative witness, saying that as a rabbi he is against the state of Illinois adopting capital punishment even for murder. So people asked Rav Aaron, he says, what's going on here? They're B'nai Noach. B'nai Noach, certainly for Shvichas Damim, there's a death penalty, and you don't need Eidim, you don't need Hasra, you don't need all of these requirements. So why would you be against the death penalty? This is a kiyum of Dinei B'nai Noach. So Rav Aaron, I think on his own, I don't think he quoted the Chelkas Yair. Rav Aaron said that there is no chiyuv on a Noachite society to have capital punishment. They could have imprisonment, they could have fines. The Torah just says we give them the authority. It's like authority. They have the authority to go as far as capital punishment, but if there's an unjust system, it's not a fully honest system, whatever it is, he says it's better for them not to go there. That is a tremendous chiddush. I mean, I think when you learn the Gemaras about Asharas and Zuhi Misasan, you never think in those terms. But he says that's the case. And that's why a civilized society is not going to execute 8-year-olds who steal, but they are going to be chayav under Dinei B'nei Noach, and the chiddush of these achrayim is al tzmi kamidi, the Katan is going to be chayav mi'ikar adin. But as I say, there's no remiss to that chiluk whatsoever in the Shulchan Aruch or the Rambam. But the other question that I'll address, again, it's in here, is, okay, so even if the kid is not chayav at all, or if at most it's a lifnim mishurat adin, is there parental obligation? Like secular law, right? Secular law commonly will make a parent obligated. Is there a parental obligation? And if there would be, what would the basis of that be? Now remember, here's the thing. I am vaday chayav, like the Chafetz Chaim said. I'm chayav for the damage my animals cause. That's Shiur, that Keren, Shane, Regel. I am chayav for the damage my animals cause, because I'm supposed to watch my animals and restrain them. Do we apply that same logic to a child? Do we look at a child like a Vilda Chaya, so to speak? Or are there other sources?
So, riot in the case of Rav, we don't. Otherwise, the father would pay to them.
Okay, I hear. So you're saying the fact that right? Okay. Well. Okay. So again, though, okay. Let me put it this way: the most you can say is that there will be some cases where the father doesn't have to pay. Yeah, but the question is, we're going to see that there are going to be shiurim where the father might have to pay, and in Rav Ashi he didn't have those shiurim.
Would there be a din de malchusa though if it's secular law, or?
So that's a big machlokas. You know, the Ramah in Chayshin Mishpat, when he talks about dina de malchusa dina, only brings it up if it's nogeya the malchus itself, like taxes. Meaning, bein adam mechavero, between you and me, two Jewish people, that has to be governed by dinei Torah, and the Ramah says dina de malchusa dina, but dafka does not apply. Now, some people are cholek, but this is the Ramah's hanhaga that bein Yisrael Yisrael, you should follow halacha, unless they're maskim. Now, keep in mind, this is another interesting issue. We can sign a contract that our transaction should be governed by the law of California, but that's not because of Dina Mechuzina, that's because we made a heskem in Mammon. I was on a basin, not on a basin, I was an expert witness in a basin. This was a basin of Bnei Brak, two religious Jews, and they were going to a basin in Bnei Brak, but their contract said that it was governed by the Uniform Commercial Code of California. That happened to have been, not California, but the UCC is the subject that I used to teach in my prior existence. So one of the sides enlisted me to kind of be a toain. So it was fascinating. Here we have like 3 dayanim b'nei brak tamidei chachamim, and they have to declare, they have to do chakiras as what's the pshat, of the UCC, and they were approaching it, it had to be translated. One dayan knew English, 2 didn't, but it had to be explained, and they were analyzing it like a sugi in Gemara, that they mamish had to look at a secular law in order to see how it would apply in this particular case. So that's shayach, but if you have chavala or whatever it is, the Ramah holds you don't apply dina de malchusa dina under those circumstances.
And what about like in a store, people have like signs up, you break it, you buy it. Are you then like maskim? Is that binding them? Like meaning you're,
so that might be shayach. That might be shayach. That the person enters the store, at least if he sees the sign, or at least if the sign is posted in a conspicuous place, so that could be considered a dati dahachi. He was maskim to the yischayvus. That actually is a very good point.
Just the Rav has another share.
Yeah, I do have another share, but okay. But anyway,
it's only the first share.
but I'm glad. I apologize, and I'm glad I was able to be mashlim a little bit. I think the next time we're meeting is a Q&A, but I'll stick in some of this extra stuff just to be mashlim it. Anyway, much hatzlacha, and very good to see you all.